Hello, everybody, and welcome to our second annual Commute, in which we're going to be kind of reviewing what we talked about in the sermon and unpacking some things that got left out on the chopping floor. Last week, I really enjoyed this format. I hope you did too. Just an opportunity to sit back and talk a little bit about what we've been researching all week and what the sermon was on and what we wanted to talk about but couldn't quite get to. So before we jump into today's kind of thoughts, do you want to give us a review of what we talked about yesterday?
Sure. Well, the topic we were discussing there was the idea of risk and how, in all things we want to feel safe. We want to make sure that we are safe, we feel safe, and there's a great natural instinct that drives us in that regard. And so what we are trying to mitigate is risk. We're trying to mitigate risk. I found a really cool quote. In fact, I didn't use it in the sermon, but I really like this. And this is one writer said, risk is taking proper calculated action despite the potential for personal loss. And I think that really does sum it up well. Whenever we have an action that has as a high potential personal loss, that's a risk. And the topic of risk that we were focusing on really has to do with the concept of love. And how love is always, at its very core, at its very nature, a risk-taking proposition. Mm-hmm. The very nature that I am choosing to demonstrate, show, exhibit love to another puts me in a vulnerable state. And that is something that we see throughout the New Testament, throughout the Old Testament, but specifically in Jesus' teachings. We spent a lot of time in the sermon talking about this idea of the natural law and the new law, the natural law, the royal law, and the new Christ-ordained law. And basically comes down to that love your neighbor as much as they love you is kind of our natural instinct. I'll show you as much love as you show me. I will risk as much as you're willing to risk. Mm-hmm. And we'll match each other's level of risk. But into that, Jesus burst into the scene. And he says, no, I want you to love others as much as you love yourself. And that's a much higher standard. The way I love myself is now supposed to be the standards by which I love others. And then, as we discussed in true Jesus fashion, he blows that one up and says, no, here's what I want. I want you to risk as much as I have risked. Mm-hmm. And that really is the measure of love that we're talking about. Now, one of the things that I think we can never cover too much, and we certainly were not able to plumb the depths of it in the sermon yesterday, was what that risk really was for God. Mm. And that's something that I think it'd be good for you to take a moment and talk about, if we're supposed to risk to the level that Jesus did, to the level that God did, what exactly is that? What does that look like?
So in the fall, I taught a class to the teens about the problem of evil, because that was a question a lot of them had. And since we've done a podcast on it, and we have a church-wide little booklet thing that you can read, but in that, one of the things we discussed a lot was the nature of risk and love. So this idea that we talked about in our sermon is something that's been kind of fresh on my mind over the last 6 months or so. And as I was writing that little booklet, one of the things that really impressed me was the way that God, from the beginning of time, did nothing but risk. It's weird to say this, but our God is a dice-rolling, risk-taking deity. It would have been easy for him to create a world without free choice, without freedom at all. But he chose to create humans that had free will. And to some degree, of course God was going to, because God always does that which is most loving. In every situation and in any context, God is going to do what's most loving. And what was most loving, as he was looking out on a blank slate, was to create a universe in which love was a possibility. To create a universe devoid of love is not a universe worth creating.
It's a safe one.
But it's a safe one. And so God chose to take this incredible risk by creating a universe in and through and for love.
Yeah.
And right in the garden, we see it. God created us, and he not only created us, but one thing we often miss is he created us to look like, act like, and be like him. Mm-hmm. He took the divine form, the divine image, the thing that separated him from the angels and the rest of the universe at the time, and he instilled it in us. And he gave us tremendous power over the cosmos, over Earth. We were the kings and queens that God instilled to be his image bearers. And then he gave us this really big command to follow him. And we didn't. 2 chapters later, we find the risk of love manifested in our behavior. God said, "Love me," and we chose not to. And in one fell moment at the tree, we see the risk of love played out. And by the way, the consequences of that risk played out, because the entire cosmos, nature itself, the ground, the trees, the sky, the universe, all of it was affected by love's choice. And it often causes me pause to consider the fact that God chose this risk. God chose to experience the rejection of love. And on the surface of that, the risk of love it seems not worthy. It seems not worth taking. But then I consider, like, Madison and I are thinking about having a kid someday. And there's a lot of risk that comes with that. There's a lot of risk that we're going to have a beautiful and awesome kid who's going to be as awesome as I am, and change the world as, and do all the things that I'm definitely going to do.
And the point you're making.
But there's also a risk that my child could turn out to be bad, that my child could get in a car intoxicated and take another person's life, that my child could make horrific decisions and really bring a detriment to society. There's a risk involved that my child could fulfill me in a way that nothing else can, or it could destroy me in a way nothing else can. But I'm still going to take the risk, because love is always worth the risk. And from the beginning of time, God has been a risk-taking God, because the risk is worth taking. And someday when we're in heaven and we're together with him and we're in his presence and he is shining his divine love upon us and we are able to reciprocate that love in a way we can't yet, it'll have been worth the risk, because love is always worth the risk. But let's make no mistake in the fact that God is a risk-taking God. There's also one other thing that I found as we were doing research on this, and I know it sounds weird, but risk takes a shape. And the more we studied it, the more we talked about it, the discussions that we had, it made me realize that the shape of risk is cruciform, the shape of a cross. Because in one fell moment, we see the risk of the cross as a perfect description of the risk of love. Christ went to the cross willing to die himself, taking on the sins of everything, becoming the curse that he wasn't, so that we could experience a level of love that we hitherto had not been able to. And the risk of rejection was great. In fact, the Bible is full of rejection. And since the cross, we see rejection. But in that moment, Christ took the risk of the cross. And then in Matthew 16, he offers us and says that if we're going to be like him, we have to take that risk, the cross, too. So Christ demonstrates that he is a risk-taking God, and then also demonstrates that we have to be a risk-taking people. But the question that I have, and I'd like us to kind of end on here, is what does it look like to be a risk-taking person in the image of a risk-taking God?
Yeah, I've given that some thought, and I think that each person has to answer that in the context of their own unique situation. I think each one of us has a unique way in which that plays out when it talks about what that risk looks like. Yesterday how I kind of concluded with that poem from Mother Teresa, and do it anyway. And in that, the idea is that there are steps that we can take that are the courageous, risk-taking actions of love. And the very nature of those being so deeply steeped in risk, they could blow up. And the admonition is, but be bold for love. Do it anyway. Do it anyway. And so I guess the thought that came to mind for me is, what was I hoping people would take from that? What was I hoping that we would go home reflecting on? We were home, everybody. What would you take and reflect on from that? And I guess the question that I would say is, what do I need to do anyway? What do I need to do anyway? What is a unique context, a unique situation where I have maybe been hesitant to boldly risk on behalf of love? Who are the people in my life that I have withheld a bold risk of love for and toward? And who do I need to do it anyway? When I was reflecting on those lines that everything that you gain in a lifetime of work can be destroyed overnight. Gain anyway. If you are successful, you'll incur the wrath of others. Be successful anyway. People are going to be unfaithful and they're going to be lacking in integrity. Love them anyway. Love them anyway. Do it anyway. And so it really made me think, where do I need to be demonstrating a risk-taking love that is reflective of, that is cruciform, that is in keeping with the image that I'm supposed to be bearing, that we're all supposed to be bearing, of a God who is the ultimate risk-taker, a God who says boldly, yes, you will destroy my heart, and I'm going to take that risk because love is always worth the risk.
I think there's a passage, and I think I threw my notes down too quick, although I don't know if I have it in there. Isaiah chapter 5, the first 5 verses, God's singing a song to Israel, and it's a song of lamentation. And so it basically is a song of heartbreak. And he starts by saying, I'm a vineyard owner, and I planted this vineyard, and I cared for this vineyard, and I tended to this vineyard, and yet when I expected it to bring good fruit, it didn't. And when I expected it to be harvest time, it was dead. And then he laments and he says, what more could I have done for my vineyard? And then he ends it by saying, Israel, what more could I have done for you? God gave everything for a people that would eventually reject him, eventually kill him. And the entire time, God never stopped tilling his vineyard. He could have, but he kept working in love. As Christians, we're human. And if God felt the lamentation, the dissonance, and the hurt from continually laboring in love for people who weren't going to care, it'd be easy for us to do the same. The reality is, in your life, you're going to demonstrate love to hundreds of people, and only a handful will ever show it to you back. In fact, a lot of your love will be wasted, or what you'll deem as wasted. But God doesn't command us to love and view results. God tells us to just love. Love is not a means to an end. Love is the means and the end that Christians are supposed to pursue. And I think
it's not measured in efficiency.
No, it's not efficient.
It's measured in lavish extreme. And that is the way God measures it, not by how much he had to pour out, and not even by how much of it was returned. But he pours it out as an expression. All of this I do as an expression of the deep love.
Well, and consider that passage in Matthew 5 when at the end, like verse 40-ish, 40-something-ish, where Jesus says, for God causes the sun to shine on the righteous and the unrighteous, and the rain to fall on the wicked and the righteous. And then he says, and basically he says, and love so that you can be like your Father in heaven. What he's saying is, if you want to be a child of God, you have to love like the sun shines and the rain falls indiscriminately in all ways. And I like the word lavish. That's a good one, but it's just a constant outpouring of love. And I think the question, how do I demonstrate this risk? How do I show this risk? I think you're right in saying, do it anyway. Do it in any circumstance despite the outcome. But also, the emphasis that Jesus puts on is just do it. Constantly do it. In our context right now, I've deleted Facebook. I've deleted it because I used to get so mad getting on there and seeing what people are saying to each other. The hate, the venom, the frustration, all of that. Love like the sun shines and the rain falls. On the people you agree with and you don't. The people you're angry with and you're not. Because that love is risky. That love is dangerous. But that love is intoxicating. And that love is fulfilling. And so this whole sermon, this whole idea of risk-taking is culminated in a cruciform love that demands that we do it anyway, all the time, to all people, regardless of the personal risk it puts on us, and regardless of the way it may affect us. Profoundly difficult.
Yeah, profoundly difficult.
but love is worth the risk.
Love is worth the risk.
Anything else?
No, appreciate you setting this up,
Yeah.
and appreciate all of you tuning in. And I hope that as we continue to further the conversation, it has value to you. It certainly does to us.
But be considering what is it in your life, in your particular context specifically, that you can do to bring this risk of love to others, and what can you do as the image bearer of the risk-taking God? What can you do in your life to be a mirror to Him? If there's nothing else, take care, and we'll talk to you guys again on Sunday.
See ya.